Okay, sorry about that. I never seem to get the timing of my tea quite right. All right, so welcome everybody to the December 17th meeting of the Climate Council's Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee. We're going to meet till about 12 today. Our agenda roughly is to finalize our matrix for inclusion in the appendix of the plan, to discuss potential ARPA funded actions. We'll break for some public comment around 11, and then we'll talk with Jane about kind of what to expect in the rest of 2021 and 22 for our work and for the work of the council. Then we'll have a little bit of time to just kind of check in with each other, since this may be our last meeting as a group for a while, and then we'll adjourn. So any questions about that?
Just that we can't okay minutes because they don't exist.
Yeah.
And it's unclear to me who is taking minutes.
I wrote, Sonia had been, she didn't last time, because I think she was under the impression we weren't really doing any substantive work, which is fine, it's not her fault. We can generate some minutes and maybe circulate them via email. I don't know, Marion, would you be able to kind of take some real rough minutes today or someone like that?
Sure, I can take them today.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think we didn't approve minutes last time either because they hadn't been posted in advance, so folks didn't have the chance to review them. So we'll get draft minutes from the past two meetings and this meeting, maybe out to folks via email, and then we can try to approve them that way if that's agreeable. Usually we don't have too much of an issue with our minutes. Okay, and the agenda sounds good to everybody? Super. All right. So
One thing that I just wanted to make sure, I know I realized, thank you, Judy, for helping me realize this, that I dropped the ball on Judy's list that she spent a lot of time on about the matrix. Pat sent it to us and to me, and I messed up. So I'm printing that out and hoping that we can resolve that within the matrix discussion somehow today. Also, Jake, hello to your adorable guest.
Oh, life in a pandemic. This is Marcella.
I feel that so deeply. Welcome, Marcella. We're happy you're here.
Yeah, she's a future contributor, so.
Yeah, no problem, Abby. I think we were both a little remiss in that I don't think the matrix got out to people either. But I have that. I'm gonna make sure that Marion and Jane have it in a second, and then they can post it. Then one of us can share our screens as we walk through it. Here it is. Marion, I'm sending it to you right now if you don't have it. I'm opening it on my computer so then we can get ready to share. So I think just to kind of back up a little bit, I think where we left off last time is that, we forward our recommendations to the council. They did what they did with them. There was a number of recommendations. Our matrix, we had discussed, kind of would serve as a long-term repository of ideas, even the ones that weren't elevated to the council for consideration. We went through and tried to clean that up, add some clarity to a few items. We discussed it last time, and there were some questions and concerns about some of the items, and the sense that maybe the matrix was lacking some pieces that had been discussed previously that had been dropped off. So I think Pat worked with some of you to try to get the matrix in better shape and be inclusive, and make some revisions based on the comments we received. And he did that work and shared it with Abby and I earlier in the week. And we'll pull that up now. I think there's some revisions, they're important, but there's few of them. So hopefully we can go through that relatively quickly and be in good shape. But, if anyone who had concerns earlier or had worked with Pat since our last meeting, has a different perspective or wants to share any of their thoughts as I'm pulling this up, feel free to. But I guess probably makes sense, Abby, for me to pull that matrix up at this point.
I think so, or maybe it makes more, I'm not sure whether it makes more sense to pull up the matrix or to pull up the list. I don't know what makes the most sense, or the list that Judy developed and how we want to resolve where those outlying things are in the matrix. Y'all, I am so sorry. My head is not together this week. Apologies. Billy, I don't know. Whichever.
I defer to, Judy, if you have a preference, let me know. My sense is that we could probably breeze through the matrix pretty quickly and then focus on the letter, the list, but I'm fine with whatever.
I don't know what you have a copy of.
All I have is the kind of Excel-based matrix that has all the tabs with the different pathways on it. And then there's some notes associated with some of those. And Abby, you may have something more.
Let me see if I can share my screen. I've never done this before, so bear with me.
Exciting.
I had a phone conversation with Patrick and we went through the list I sent him. And he told me that, because my minority report was due yesterday. And so I was going to comment on some of them. He told me which ones not to comment on because we would discuss them today. So the ones that had no, I didn't comment on. But I don't know if the form you have is the same form I have.
Okay.
Again, audience, so sorry for the scramble. Billy, I cannot make my screen share thing work because my computer is ridiculous. So I'm going to send you what I have, if that works.
Sure.
Okay.
While you're doing that, Abby, I just have to commend you for being almost into 2022 and never having shared your screen. That's pretty impressive.
I win. I win the Zoom battles. Woohoo!
All right. Let's see. Ooh.
I am nothing if not stubborn, Warren, or determined, whatever adjective.
Things are going really well today. So I got the file, but now it's saying 404 file directory not found. So you don't have that like as a document, do you? Or is it just?
I'll find it. Anybody else have anything amazing they want to share about their lives today? Oh my
Well,
God,
why don't we try to go through the matrix first briefly? I think we can do that and then start that. And then as soon as you get something in a file format, we can work through it. Does that sound okay? Because I think the matrix is pretty straightforward. So let me start.
The changes are in red, so that
Exactly.
should be easy to screen for.
Yeah. So this has been posted on the website. I'm going to screen share right now. Please let me know whether you can see it.
The problem is that I'm not sure what Patrick and I discussed is in the matrix.
Okay. Then we can hold off.
That's what our discussion was about, adding it to the matrix.
Okay. I see. All right. Then I'll stop sharing and we'll wait for Abby to.
I forwarded you the email from Pat. It says matrix and outstanding issues, and then it has a Word document,
Okay.
Judy's
Got
list, that says, whether
right,
things
right.
are in the matrix or not.
All right. Here we go, folks. It only took 11 months, 13 months to figure it out. All right. Can folks see that? Yes, no? Okay, great. So I'll make this as big as I can, and then I don't know, Judy, Abby, do you want to walk through this and you can just tell me when to scroll down?
Well, these are items that I took from minutes and chats and videos, and we started discussions, and each time we were told, well, there's not enough time to discuss this, so it was ended. So what I was trying to find out was, were these things carried on to another committee? Did they discuss them? Or were they in the matrix and I just missed them? And if so, should I put them in my minority report? And because the minority report was due the day before we were going to discuss this, it was a little tricky, right? So, so the first one we discussed, we had some conversation about backyard boilers, and that people had discussed issues that they were seeing. And Patrick wrote on the right-hand side, could we include this recommendation in the action matrix?
Yeah, and I see that he has added that to the matrix, I believe. I just need to find where it is, but he did add that to a version that I saw someplace.
Okay.
Yeah,
so-
the one that's posted on the website includes language about individual backyard boilers, about enforcement and what's being burned in it, and then also see some new language around land grabs as well. That's all I can see of the document, but can't confirm during the matrix posted on the website.
Okay, and that's all we need to do is go through these and see if it got posted, see if people agree, because he added that to the matrix, but we didn't finish the discussion, so I don't know if everybody agrees on that or not.
Okay. So let's go through your list here since it's up, and then confirm kind of the disposition of all these things. And then we can go back to the matrix and see how the language looks, and see if it's okay with everybody. So yeah, backyard boilers and land grabs are in there with kind of expanded language. Let's see. Combined sewer overflows.
I thought there was language that was in the tap regarding wastewater discharges, within heavy precipitation events, but I could be.
That's, I think if you look at the screen here, Pat is indicating that on page 219 of the plan under the cross-cutting issues section, that language has been added, is in the plan. So that may or not meet Judy and others' intent, but it's in there in that way.
So it's in there to say, find ways to limit discharge?
I believe so. I think he quoted directly from the plan.
Well, I'm not sure that that's sufficient, because they've been working for what, 2 decades now to find ways to limit. They got to do something more than that.
Yeah, I know that all the municipal wastewater treatment systems, I believe, have kind of long-term capital plans to address these combined sewer overflows, and there's a significant amount of ARPA money that's been appropriated to implement those plans. They're major capital projects, so they are planned out over a period of time.
So then should our recommendation be find ways and furnish the funding to do it?
Sure.
Well, I'm just saying, if they can find ways and can't afford it, that's still a problem. They've been working on this forever. And if there's money available, let's recommend they give the money.
I believe it's in, what I hear from what Billy shared is it's in the climate action plan on page 219 to invest in public infrastructure around sewer and water, and that ARPA dollars are already appropriated to that effort. And based on what's happening and rural resilience. I wonder if there'll be another recommendation coming from that subcommittee for further funding. So I think I see it highlighted as a priority as well as something that already has funding appropriated to it.
I don't see that in here. Do you see that? It will show me where it says that.
I see it on page 219 of the climate action plan that I'm going to.
Okay, so
paste
on
in
the
chat.
climate, on the page 219, it says they will give them money.
The strategy is to increase investment in the infrastructure, which includes specific language around sewer and water.
Okay, okay, thank you.
infrastructure.
Okay, and I see Lauren put something in there too. On page 149 and 150, it says it. Okay, great.
Okay. Good. The next one here is comments related to density.
Yeah, so there was a discussion going on about everybody seemed to want to increase the density of inner city or inner town villages, but there was no discussion how to do that when the town village is regularly flooded. And so it appears in some towns, like Brandon and Wilmington, the town village has got to be moved or something else has to be done, because if you increase the amount of people there, you're going to increase the amount of damage.
Yeah, and I do see that Pat has added language to our matrix specifically on that topic, citing Brandon and Wilmington. So
Okay.
why don't we just kind of hold that thought and know that, and he's also actually added stuff on the wastewater discharge as well. So
Okay.
as we go back through the matrix, we'll see those.
Okay, great. And then-
Just a quick, sorry to interrupt, Judy, just a quick comment on Brandon, since it's right near me. There was a news release in the paper just this week that Brandon had received funds to purchase several properties that are prone to flooding and removing them. And so just so you know, Judy, that things are happening.
And are those in the village?
I believe so. Yes, they're right along the whatever the little river is that's called there that floods on occasion.
Neshabie River.
Neshabie, exactly. And I should remember that. But yep.
And Judy, I've worked with the town of Brandon a lot over the past 7-ish years, and they've invested a lot of federal, state, and local money into removing those vulnerable houses and doing a pretty significant culvert upgrade in their downtown to convey more water so that they have less of a choke point in their downtown. So they're doing a lot of work to keep both their town infrastructure and their people more resilient. They're kind of a little bit of a flood resilient success story, actually.
Well, that's to be seen, right? Because the confluence still happens right there, and they still have a choke point. And they've gone through 5 town managers since 2011 over this issue. So I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate that. It's just we don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know if it's going to work or not.
I think the unfortunate thing with this, and I can say this as Wilmington being the town in which my children go to school, and my husband has his office, et cetera, is the best I think we should include recommendations that we're all comfortable with. I can also tell you that convincing municipalities to do things that they don't want to do is a pretty tricky thing, especially just in a paragraph in a plan. So I think the best we can do is just put the recommendation in there, and unfortunately, I don't know what else we as the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee can do except express our interest that and I believe this is being followed up on with the ARPA dollars, et cetera, that the strategic investments in creating better resilience in those types of communities is, you know, a focus that needs to be pursued.
Right. I agree with you. We could not convince the towns. I mean, I've stayed in Brandon for programming for weeks and weeks, for years and years. And the community, I've spoken with the community a lot about this. And yeah, that village green is too important to them. And that history that goes with the village green to move it. But I think what I'm saying is there's something needs to be done to protect these people if this is what they want to do. And if we want to increase the amount of people living in the inner city or the inner village. That's all I'm saying.
Judy,
Great.
you're gonna love the flood resilience proposal that we're gonna talk about later, I think.
Yeah, so there's something added to the matrix for this, which is great. So let's we'll see that when we go back to the matrix, but I think it addresses your comments, hopefully, Judy.
Okay. And then there was brought up by the public was some of the lot sizes, the minimum lot size in villages is big. And so the recommendation that didn't get passed on was to reduce the size of some of those lots so you could have like filled in areas in the middle of villages. And Patrick said that wasn't in there.
Yeah, I know that's certainly a strategy that the Commerce Agency and others have been taking, and working on legislation that kind of requires that increased density in certain parts of the state. But so if it's not, I don't see that explicitly. Oh yeah, it's actually in, Pat added it to our matrix, so it's in there. So we'll see that when we go back through.
Okay.
Pat is on it. Okay, and then the reduced consumption one, I don't know if that's been added.
Yes. He said he couldn't find it, but he was going to check with Jane. So I don't know if that ever happened.
Sorry, I took a bite of a rice cake. Yes, he did check with me, and I circled and pointed to the personal action pathway section in the cross-cutting section that focuses on consumption. It focuses on more than consumption. I would say it doesn't focus on consumption, but there's a couple paragraphs that's clearly about the role of consumptive behavior in reducing emissions.
Awesome, thanks. And then did we put anything in our pathways about reducing methane emissions? Apparently that was something brought up in discussion as well and never answered.
No, there's lots of, that's the ag mitigation recommendations have a lot in there about methane emission reductions. Specifically regarding manure management.
Okay. And just plain reducing emissions. There was lots of discussion about, if you remember right, about tourism. And I almost fell out of my chair when Jane said last week, they're going to support the increase of tourism, because that's where the majority of our emissions is coming from. And there was discussion about encouraging hospitality and leisure and tourism and all those different communities about getting them to do things to help with this issue, like maybe having a bus, a trolley, or a train or something like that to go back and forth to ski areas, so you don't have 50 cars going back and forth on a daily basis from the hotel. And brought it up, we talked about it, and that has sat there. Because we didn't have enough time.
So the whole kind of framework of the Global Warming Solutions Act requires significant emissions reductions over the next 30 years with milestones in 2025, 2030, and 2050. I don't think it directs whether those need to come from Vermont residents or tourists. It just says categorically emissions need to be reduced.
Well, we all
So-
know that, Billy. That's why we're
Okay,
here.
well, it's
but I
not clear to me what the problem is then.
I think what Billy is getting, so the way that the GWSA explains the emissions reduction is it focuses on the transportation sector. And so the way, as I understand it, the way that they calculated the emissions from that was the fuel consumption. And Lauren, maybe you can help me, or somebody, Jane can help me with this. The fuel consumption from Vermont. In other words, when tourists are here, for example, they purchase they purchase fuels while they're here, whether it's heating costs for second homes or rentals, et cetera. So all of those emissions from the tourism industry are a component of either the buildings or the transportation emissions profile that are legally mandated to be reduced. So that's where it's covered. It doesn't call out tourism specifically, but it's covered in the way that the emissions profiles were calculated for consumption.
It's
And
also a discussion as we're talking now about how we measure and track progress. Tourism actually comes up quite a bit in that conversation, because we talk about how you can do everything right, and then you can have a really good leaf peeping year and have an influx of everybody from out of state, and the peak of gas goes up from people driving around. And so there are these unpredictable components of the way we track our emissions that are explicitly linked to the weather in the winter that we can't predict, or tourism. And we're talking about how we speak to tourism as a result in the measuring and tracking progress tool. So it'll be something we can think about there as well, and highlight the challenges associated with people in our state consuming things.
so not talking about individuals like tourists, but talking about organizations and businesses and stuff like that, that encourages and thrives off tourism. What role are they playing in reducing?
They're gonna have to comply with the same programs that require emissions reductions from the thermal and transportation sectors as other businesses.
But they're not going to take a proactive approach to doing something like getting a van that goes back and forth from the hotel during ski season or something like that. They're not being asked to take a proactive stance on this.
I don't know.
Well, neither did Patrick. That's why it's on here.
I think again, it's the recommendations in the transportation section focus primarily on I'm losing the terminology, not medium and heavy duty.
Single-use vehicle.
Although it does somewhat, but that's part of the rationale, as I understand it, about electric car chargers, et cetera, is to try to put in the infrastructure so that, people can know when they come to the state that they can reliably charge the electric vehicles, et cetera. And then I believe there is also some language in there regarding, electric buses. I know there are pilot projects going on for school buses, and I assume that probably some of those will start to extend to the tourism industry and, you know, some of the fleets from the ski resorts and things like that. I could be wrong. I'm not sure if there's specific language to that, but it would seem that that would be a likely outcome.
Well, see,
I don't know if there's language regarding that.
when we discussed this last time, we were told that this would be forwarded on to another subcommittee. But I'm not sure that the intent of our conversation was forwarded on.
So if you'd like, I'm fine with adding something to our matrix, and something along the lines of encourage the hospitality sector to work proactively with visitors to reduce emissions.
Okay.
Great, so we'll add that to the matrix as we go along. I'll put it in the chat right now. And let's see, chat box is in the way. So reducing emissions, okay, we'll address that. Forest being cut down, once it's cut down, so we did have a discussion that forests that are harvested in the context of ongoing sustainable management, whereas the intent is to cut trees down and then allow additional trees to regenerate. That is accounted for in the carbon budget, as is land conversion when forests are cut down for another use and the intent isn't for trees to regenerate. Those have different carbon impacts, and those are captured in the carbon budget. So I'm not exactly sure.
But we did discuss that, you're right, Billy, but we did not come to an agreement on that, because what Ally said was that, yes, if a forest is totally cut down, it is still counted according to some national forest formula she mentioned. It's still counted as a forest. It's not really going to be a forest for a very, very long time.
That's how it's managed for science and carbon accounting. I don't know what to tell you. It's
Well,
it's
I
a state
know
of
that.
regeneration. It's like when I shave my head, I still have hair, but it's really small and it's growing back, and at some point it's going to get longer. So I think it's the same metaphor.
Well, no, it's not, because it's not going to keep your head warm till it's fully grown out. And that's the same with the forest. It's not going to be, it can't be used in a formula to someplace that stores carbon until there's trees there to store it. And that could take a long time.
David, do you have thoughts on
I have
this,
a
or
process
should I-
question, just because of the time that this is taking. I'm trying to figure out what's the best use of the committee's time. I mean, Judy's asking a series of questions and there's a dialogue happening with Judy answering her questions, but we're not really getting to the place of considering actual recommended language, which seems like where we should get to. Like, are we gonna, someone can recommend language, defend why they think it should be in there. We can talk about the pros and cons of it and then make a decision. But the way we're proceeding, it just feels like it's a dialogue with Judy, between Billy and Judy and Abby and Jane. And I don't know if you need me for that. So I've got other things I could be doing.
Thank you, David. But I was told by Billy to do this because I was also told, as was the public, that there would be a minority report, and there is not. So I was asked to go through all those minutes and chats and things to come up with what was not finished as a discussion.
So let me jump in here. I would like to move this forward as well. I think most of these have been incorporated into our matrix through the work that Judy and Pat did. I think there's a couple here that don't appear to be. I think we're trying to explain them. We can certainly take this conversation offline. I thought that was the work that you and Pat, Judy had done together. I guess it wasn't complete.
No, it was completed. I was told it would be discussed at today's meeting.
Okay. So most of what's on here has been incorporated in the matrix. This one about forests, I think there's just a disagreement. I don't think that our experts who work in this field, I think their position is that forests in any state of regeneration, if part of an ongoing management cycle, are considered forests. So I just don't know what to say to you about that.
Well, it's clear what you're saying. You're saying, Billy, that equity doesn't matter and another opinion shouldn't be considered because we don't have time for it.
In fairness,
That's not what I'm saying, Judy, at all.
Well,
I
that's
think
what it feels like, Billy. That's what it feels like you've been saying right along. To actually say that we will have a minority report and then say, go ahead and write your own letters. That's not a minority report. We haven't done that as a group, and we should have done that as a group. We promised the public, we promised the participants in this that we would do a minority report. We didn't. We were told to write an individual letter. How can you write an individual letter if you don't know half the stuff, whether it's been in there or not, or forwarded to the next group? And the fact that it was due the day before our meeting was wrong.
I think, again, what we're running into here are the massive issues of when we try to rush a process that is supposed to be handled in a way that facilitates a just transition, and that is not possible to do on a rushed timeline. I will be very honest, I do not know how to fix any of this at this point because we are so far in that the errors are finding a way out of them isn't going to change the errors and the harm that was done in the process. Regarding the forest specifically, I don't think, Judy, that at least I agree with your and the members of the public who are commenting that there is a problem with the way that that is being thought about. I think it's another one of those issues where this is the, it's, I deal with this all the time in the dairy world. The feds set a certain thing and the states have to follow it. And, there's not much wiggle room there in terms of the people who are actually tasked with doing those calculations until some of the laws or the regulations around certain things shift and they can look at them differently, which doesn't mean we can't call attention to it. I also am cognizant, David, I appreciate what you're saying. I know that everybody's time is very valuable and we've all spent a lot of time in this. I am sorry that Pat isn't here and that I don't know a better way through this or a better way to get us around where we're at. I really don't. I don't know. I know we need to discuss ARPA recommendations today. I also know that this really matters, and given the level of difficulty and or harm that's been done already, I'm hesitant. I don't know.
I'm not trying to cut off discussion. I'm just saying for efficiency's sake, it feels like if there's a recommendation that we're considering, like this thing about this conversation about is it a forest or not a forest, I'm not sure if there's a recommendation, and I'm not even sure how to get traction around where we would change language in the report. And at this point, I think we're kind of beyond philosophical conversations into like concrete. Do we want to change the recommendations in the matrix or not? Or do we want to pull some language into a minority report or not? And so there should be specific proposal for language, some back and forth about yes or no. We make a decision and move on. It just feels very open-ended and not efficient in terms of just getting through this final step of the process.
Then why was I asked to do this? I spent several weeks, David, going through chat boxes, going through minutes, going through videotapes to get these comments.
Do you have a recommendation with regard to the forests or not forests that we could consider, and then we can make a decision? I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't raise the point or it wasn't valuable. I'm just not sure. The conversation seemed like you're asking questions of people that have to do with very broad issues, but it's not specific to a way that we would change the report or put language in a minority report. So that's all I'm trying to get to.
Well, because I was under the assumption if I brought these unanswered things up, there would be a discussion. And the recommendation would be not to follow the formula that we're following to calculate forest as forest. You can't count something that's a forest that is totally cut down. You can't count it as a forest and have an accurate amount of carbon loss or gain for decades. So the formula is imperfect. And my recommendation would be to fix it.
Does anybody have an idea about a place in the matrix where we could, maybe it's where the language around the emissions calculations regarding ag emissions there could be some language in there about this. Jane's hand is raised. Jane, go ahead.
Well, I just want, I'm sorry, I'm like partially engaged right now because of something that was happening, but not because of the conversation and the value of it. I did just want to appreciate that Judy did submit a minority report yesterday at the end of the day, and it's a tremendous piece of work, and we have that. And I had only opened it this morning, and I'm happy we will share it with all of you so you can see. One of the questions, comments I had about process at this point was that my understanding was that your matrix as a document was done. And so I just want to ask about that, because when I heard David ask his question about like the track that we're on, I had understood, Judy, and I could be wrong, was that this effort here with these questions and outstanding issues was a place to ensure clarity to know where things were or weren't addressed, so that you could feel comfortable or not comfortable in the dissenting opinions that you put forward around the overall cap, but not to influence change in the matrix, which I thought we resolved and reached consensus on last week, and that will be posted today as part of the appendix document for the council for Tuesday. I also wanted to appreciate that if there are still counselors sharing signing statements with me today, and therefore if there were changes or things that had to be improved upon in the minority report, mindful that it's not ideal that you had to do that on your own, but that is where we're at this point. If there are things after today's conversation that are still providing consternation and want to go back into that letter to make enhancements, we can certainly accommodate that.
That's partially correct, Jane. I was concerned about trying to make out a minority report without having answers to these questions. That's true. But because now, as you know, some of them have been answered. So what I've said in that document is no longer accurate. Then the other thing is, I was clearly told we would impact the matrix with discussion we're having on this.
So, am I muted?
You're not muted, Billy. We can
Okay, so the matrix has been revised to add a number of the items on this Word document. So we can, if it's easier to just go through, and I think what we try to do is walk through the Word document and identify where items have been added to the matrix. We can continue to do that. We can breeze through the matrix to show everyone where those items have been added. And then I think what remains, you know, notwithstanding the additions we've made so far, maybe that's where you can focus your minority comments.
Well, they
But-
had to be turned in yesterday, Billy.
I'm sure if they need, if they need to be adapted, Jane, I'm sure we can make that possible. Yes?
The matrix, do you mean, Abby?
No, Judy's minority report.
We plan to include Judy's minority report as part of the appendix documents.
I know. I'm wondering if there are outstanding issues from today that she doesn't feel like are covered to the degree that she feels they need to be covered in the matrix, if she can revise a component of what she already said. Okay.
Happy.
You know, it's concerning me that everybody keeps saying in the chat box, Judy, or in comments, Judy. I did not do this because of Judy's opinion. I did this because we were told as a body there would be a minority report. And then at the end, we were told as a body there would not be one unless we wrote individual letters. That's why I did this. It's not just a Judy's comments. I'm trying to put some legitimacy to what the process we've been doing. And clearly there was a misnomer there.
And I apologize, that may have been my miscommunication. I have always understood the opportunity for a minority report as the opportunity for individual members to speak to issues that they have issue with in the majority's recommendation. That's how I've always understood it. I've never understood it as something that the group in a facilitated way would develop together. Minority opinions, minority reports, I've always understood as being authored by individuals who have a dissenting opinion. So I'm sorry if there was miscommunication there, but that was always how I understood this opportunity. But clearly that's not how maybe it was perceived by everybody.
No, it wasn't. It shouldn't come from one person. It should come from the group. And if the group doesn't agree, fine, it doesn't agree. How many people here wrote a dissenting opinion? Probably nobody but me, right? So then that makes it a Judy issue. And it's not a Judy issue. It's an issue that we were promised a minority report and we didn't get it. I mean, if this state continues to only have a majority opinion, nothing is going to get accomplished. 273 pages, majority opinion.
Ryan, do you want to go? And then I have some thoughts to add.
Yeah, I'm trying to reflect on Billy's comments and just share that was my understanding as well. That the process that I feel we've been engaged in, regardless of what our individual organizations, affiliations, or personal opinions may be, we work together to try to get to consensus. And I think in language that made it into the climate action plan, there's lots of caveats and articulations about where there are gaps or other alternative ways of approaching problems, and that in the title itself as initial, it leaves a lot of room for refinement, reflection in the future. And as I've seen the process articulated on the Climate Council side and those that have explicit objections they want to register as part of the climate action plan, that would come from individuals as we worked as a group, as a subcommittee, to try to put forward consensus recommendations. And so I just wanted to throw my opinion in the ring for whatever it's worth about, I guess, my understanding of that, and that, folks certainly can share their thoughts through signing statements or other, obviously we don't have signing statements in the subcommittee, but reflections on that process.
Ryan, that would be true had we not already put into our matrix some minority comments where we said, not everybody agrees on this. And to do consensus for a majority opinion and not consensus for a minority opinion is not right. Because we did consensus on some minority opinions, they're in the matrix already. We say we don't agree. And to not do consensus for the rest of them is not right.
I don't have the right words, Judy. Like you and I have talked about, I think there was so much within this process because of the speed that it moved that for me personally, this was the first time I had worked within consensus, and quite frankly, that I think that shows you have a much fuller understanding of what that actually is supposed to look like in practice from your work, and I this was my first foray into that, and I will freely admit that as coach, I throughout the entirety of this process have not felt equipped for the magnitude of the work or the questions that continued to come up in the process. I think the council at least was building so much of this as we went along, and that's why we're here. That's why it was such a mess. I know there are lots of counselors who don't want to say that, but I feel it, so I'm going to say it. And the best we can do at this moment is, for me, all I can say is I have looked at this a lot as how Ryan has explained it. There are so many things in the climate action plan that I do not personally endorse or agree with. And I sort of took that as part of the process that, 23 disparate individuals came together from various places and perspectives and lived experiences. And no matter what came out of that, I wasn't going to agree with everything.
So with Abby, with consensus, everybody has to agree to disagree. And I asked that of Jane on the very first meeting. And she said, yes, that's what consensus means. And we have agreed to disagree on many things. We put it in the matrix when we did that. What we haven't agreed on is these things. These were left hanging.
So if folks are agreeable and we just want to add everything that is on the Word document list that isn't on the matrix to the matrix as an item that was discussed by the group as a way to kind of move us forward, that's a fine approach from my perspective.
Can I ask how it would be added and where? I haven't seen this Word document before, and not trying to belabor this process, but haven't had a chance to review and don't know the manner and form in which it would be added. I think echo also what Jane said, that I thought that, and I'm certainly fine looking at the red writing that was amended or added to the matrix that's on the website. I'm fine with all that language. I just wasn't sure if you were suggesting adding more language, Billy.
I was, because I think there's items on the Word document list that have not been added to the matrix in red. There's just a couple of them. They're the ones we've been discussing recently. So I'm trying to just find a path forward here But
Billy, I'm not sure I quite understand what it would say. Like we would we would put some language in the matrix that says we talked about these things, but we never reached agreement on them.
well, the matrix has a number of items in it that weren't elevated to the council. And there's a column now that indicates what was elevated and what wasn't. And my understanding was that there was going to be some prefatory language to this appendix saying that items that weren't elevated to the council may not have enjoyed consensus support by the subcommittee or something along those lines, because we didn't do that analysis of the ones that didn't get into the list that was elevated. There's been this desire to kind of include all of these items in a list that gets in the appendix. And there are a number of them that are just listed that frankly, we really haven't discussed that much, but have been on the list. And I think there's an expectation that those are going to get forwarded on with some caveat. I think what Judy's saying is that there are items that are not included in the matrix that we've discussed that should be. She worked with Pat to add some, but not all. And if a resolution of her concerns is to add all of them, that's a path that we can consider.
So taking the question about forests as an example, what would be in the matrix around the question of, would it just simply say questions were raised about whether or not the definition of forest in the carbon budget is the right definition?
I think that could be.
Because what I don't want to happen is I don't want to be associated with a report that includes things that there are some of these items I am fine with and some I have strong disagreement with. And I don't want it to be suggested that we were in agreement with points where there's not.
Exactly. I feel the same way, David.
Ryan, you got your hand up. I'll be right back.
Thanks. Jane, to the point you just raised about actions listed in the matrix. So those that in the future can't read the chat, it says all action, it's a potential disclaimer or preface to what's in these matrices about, may not have had full consent of all members of the subcommittee. One of my questions is, aren't some of the actions in the subcommittee those that may have had consensus but didn't rise to high priority or didn't feel that they should be elevated if they were medium or low based on consensus of the group? So they may have been consensus recommendations but weren't time bound or cost effective or an impact that could be quantified as some of the reasons why they might be in the matrix and not in the subcommittee strategies and actions section.
Yep, that's right. I don't think that this disclaimer takes that away. That could be additive because this just says may not have full consent, because you didn't.
Yeah,
and I would
just
say your matrix is like the matrices for cross sector, for instance, have the priority ranking for all actions, so you can actually see, but your matrix doesn't have that, so it's a little trickier. Anyway.
Absolutely acknowledge that that's a gap, and I guess my comment is just, it may be good to include language around that, and I certainly think the language you put forward is fine. I just wanted to ask about our particular matrix, so thanks for that clarification.
Appreciate that. Yep.
Well, with that in mind, Billy, I'm fine with your proposal to kind of capture this list as things that were discussed but not resolved.
I think Billy had to step away for a moment, but I can capture that in the minutes.
Does any anybody else in the subcommittee have any thoughts regarding whether they're amenable to, you know, these things being captured in the matrix as unresolved?
I'm okay with that. I think I share the concern that there may be some things that don't get included. And so I really appreciate Judy taking the time to make sure that everything is included in and captured for the future people that might be reading the report. I think if I'm not sure if it's feasible within a short time frame, but I wonder if it's possible to make a list of those things that didn't get captured in the minority report and would get added to the matrix just for us to review as a short list, because I don't have access to this longer document. It's hard for me to know. And I don't need to see that in order to be okay with things getting added and included, with the caveat that we didn't discuss. But if it's possible, I would love to see it and help.
Yeah, I agree with Alyssa and think that if a caveat is hopefully added, that it acknowledges both the lack of time to do a lot of the work and have a lot of these important conversations, but also the opportunity to kind of use those unfinished conversations as breadcrumbs in the future. And then to also use that, maybe it's like an entire caveat paragraph at this point in time, but acknowledgement that quite a bit of what I saw on the screen and what we've discussed over the past couple of months has been the lack of opportunity to meet largely with cross-sector mitigation subcommittee, and just acknowledge that that is work that needs to continue or happen moving forward. So I just recommend adding those three things in the caveat language.
Okay, so Jane, does that seem feasible? Okay. I think for now, if everyone is amenable to that, that's where we will leave the matrix. Does that make sense? Okay.
Sure.
I'm gonna go with yes. I have to find my agenda.
So now I think we're gonna, we have,
So
go ahead. I was gonna say that. I think next, we were gonna go on to ARPA funding, but we're at 11, and this is when we're gonna give an opportunity for public comment. So we could either hold public comment till after we have the funding conversation or have it now. So whatever you think is best, Abby.
let's do public comment and then we'll dive into ARPA after that.
Okay, great. Anyone who'd like to share?
If the public feels like they're, okay, so Jennifer has her hand raised, so let's let Jennifer go.
Go ahead, Jennifer and Zach. So Jennifer, you can go first, then Zach. Thanks.
Thanks very much, everybody. Just a general comment on some type of report or changes to the matrix that might occur. I fully understand that many of the participants in this subcommittee were under the understanding that a minority report was based on individual comments. As a member of the public, what I'm particularly interested in is seeing the climate action plan, seeing the matrix, and then capturing anything that wasn't included. And I don't see this as Judy's particular points because I think she combed through a great deal of information, and some of those comments were from a variety of subcommittee members. And I think some sort of preface could be written to that says these other comments were made by various subcommittee members. They don't reflect by any means any consensus necessarily. And so I think that they just highlight things to the public that are other issues to consider. And I'll give a specific example of the carbon budget and some of the comments that David raised about what would be a specific recommendation. And, you know, it may not be as satisfying as it needs to be, but I think we all know that as we progress, and Alyssa knows a lot about this, and Allie knows a lot about this, we can improve our understanding of different land use patterns. It is clear that the carbon held in a forest that is just recently cut is rather different than an old growth forest. And so I think we're going to get better at capturing what that means, and we're going to get better at understanding. The same is true of agricultural lands. The carbon held in a hayfield is not the same as what is held with annual crops, and we're going to get better. And again, Allie knows way more about this than most of us do. So I think, you know, a simple statement in a minority report of we need to identify clearly in the future how much carbon is held would be beneficial. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Jennifer. Zach?
Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. Good morning. Zach Boyer with Standing Trees, and just wanted to weigh in on a couple of things, just picking up where Jennifer left off. You know, because like Jennifer said, a number of the things that Judy has highlighted were not necessarily her, I don't believe, you know, suggestions. And, you know, originally, I do wonder, you know, Judy's been kind of going at this on her own, and I give her a lot of credit for, you know, standing up for a lot of the issues that she's bringing here and the questions that she's asking. And I struggle to think that there aren't other members of this committee who agree with Judy on at least some of the things that she's raising here. So I certainly hope that where there's agreement between other members of the subcommittee and you know, with what Judy's brought forward here, that you'll join her in noting your dissent on those particular issues, even if it's not a across the board dissent, overlapping entirely with everything that's there. But I struggle to see why Judy is kind of feeling out on her own on these issues. We've all been listening to the same information over the last year, and I imagine there's others who share some of her opinions. So I hope that you will join Judy where you feel comfortable doing so, so that she's not left hanging like this. I also just wanted to touch on a couple of other things. We're about to talk about ARPA funding. I don't see a clear focus in the document that I believe Lauren and David put together. I might be missing it on funding for wildlands, natural lands, conservation in Vermont, which, as I've discussed before, gets a very small percentage of the dollars coming in for conservation purposes. Tiering to your endorsement of Vermont conservation design goals, we should be using these dollars going forward to reach the balance that VCD envisions for the Vermont landscape. We have recent examples of where really fantastic projects have been denied public funding for absolutely no reason that would have helped us to get to VCD. So I'm wondering if we could you know, make sure in your comments that we're highlighting the opportunity to kind of do things differently going forward, to use those dollars with the balance that VCD promotes, maybe even requiring some percentage of those dollars to go to projects of a different variety, of the natural lands variety. Lastly, this is a question for you all. Annette brought this up in the chat, and I wanted to just highlight it. What is going to be the process that you know, kind of work through with cross-sector mitigation on some of these questions around life cycle accounting for biomass and other things like that? It's not clear to me yet what the process is going to look like. how and when the public can get involved. Some of those things would be wonderful to just hear from you. How is that shaping up for the new year, and how will that be reflected in the climate action plan? Just so you all know, I don't think this was mentioned already. I'm hoping that it will come up at some point, but cross-sector mitigation is moving forward with a request for information on life cycle accounting analysis for biomass. And I want to make sure that this subcommittee plays a equal part in that process. So just flagging that, and hope you all might be able to speak to it. Okay, thank you. I appreciate the time.
Cheryl?
So, hi, everyone. I want to concur with all three of the previous public commenters, Jennifer, Zach, and Annette, and double what they say. I agree totally with all of it. Additionally, I want to say that not only have those items been talked about by not only Judy and members of the public, but also other members of this subcommittee and other subcommittees as well, talked about a lot of those things on Judy's list. And additionally, public participation has been spoken about by the Climate Council and by a lot of different places, saying that they wanted more public participation. And this is one of the failings of this whole process so far, but not for not having some of the public attend your meetings every single time almost. And offer very substantive other work and offering it to all of you on some of the items that are in question here, and not very controversial, yes, but with regard to economics, not science. So the thing is, additionally, at least one other subcommittee here has invited public participation at all times during their meetings, because sometimes people have something important to add during a conversation. This one we've had in opportunity, sometimes after the meeting is supposed to be over, to add comments. And I've even several times asked about if people are even paying attention to any of it, because sometimes that's not going on. Some of this stuff is really important, and I feel like that some of you are not even looking at that stuff. I've seen numerous things added into the public portal that it doesn't seem like anybody is really paying attention to some of that stuff. I know that some of you are, but I also don't know if some of you are. And I think that everybody should be looking at that. The opportunity to listen to the public is here, and it's not being taken advantage of sometimes, and it's not being addressed, things that are not being addressed. So a lot of those comments on the thing that we were just looking at, that list that was written up, are important things, and they all should be there. And I've got more to say about it, but I'm not going to right now. And I think that people should pay more close attention to what public is saying, not especially anything. I guess that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Cheryl. Before we move on, I just want to clarify something. This conversation we're having about forests and carbon, my sense is that there's a lot of things kind of getting mixed and matched here. The carbon budget accounts for emissions associated with the harvesting of trees. So if trees are harvested or cut down and used for a range of wood products, those are considered fluxes in the carbon budget. Those trees are no longer considered stored in the way as standing forest is. That's an analysis that is done. There's a different conversation about what constitutes a forest from a land use perspective. And when an area of land that is primarily forest is subject to ongoing forest management, with the intent of regenerating forest for a prolonged period through sustainable means for forest health, that area is still considered forest, even if patches or areas of it don't have a majority of standing trees for some period of time. When windstorms or other events blow down significant acres of forests through natural occurrences, those are still considered forests as part of the regeneration process. So folks can disagree with that, but I just wanted to be clear that the carbon accounting and the way that we consider forests from a land use categorization perspective are two separate things and dealt with separately in the carbon budget. All right, thank you.
Additionally, I guess I do feel I need to say this respectfully. I can completely understand how frustrating this process has been for members of the public and those of you who we all know very well who you are and how much time you have put into being here. However, I don't think that any of you understand the full depth and breadth of the time and energy and effort and toll that this has taken on those of us who are in the subcommittee. I can say this for myself. And additionally, what we have struggled to take forward from this subcommittee to the full council and get support there. So again, respectfully, I make $50 a week for the sometimes 30 hours a week I put into this work, and I'm doing the best that I can. I am not paid well to do anything in this life that I do. And for example, there is so much nuance that we haven't been able to cover in any of these conversations. For example, Zach, every time you bring up the natural lands and it's how it's somehow removed from working lands or things, sometimes I want to scream and say to you, my conservation easement holds wild lands, wetlands, forest lands, grasslands, all managed organically, no pesticides, no chemicals, whatever. There are a lot of places like that. This was the first committee that I know of that put together in one space agricultural purposes of land and the natural landscape and said all of the advocates and all of the people who have a stake in this work come together in 10 months and figure it out. So we have missed so much because there was no way we could ever address in any substantive, true, or real way the breadth of material and literal land base that we were supposed to cover in the work of this subcommittee. So of course we have fallen short. And of course it has been frustrating for everybody involved. What I need, I guess, or what I'm asking is, and I've said this before and I will continue to say it again, we are doing the best we can. If you feel very strongly about any of these things, I would encourage you deeply to take your concerns to the legislature because we cannot fix this. The best we can do is show up with the best intentions and with as much heart or effort as we possibly can and try to balance the perspectives of a very disparate group of people who all have extraordinarily different perspectives and priorities in terms of how this could go forward. And I do think that at the end of the day, a lot of what we came out of here with, this was pretty impressive, what was put together by this group. And I'm so tired of fighting at every level for what we did here. So I'm just going to take a minute to say, I think this is pretty amazing what happened here. Because I've seen other endeavors like this happen in other places and fall straight to the floor. And we all stuck with this, and we came out of this with an albeit wildly imperfect set of recommendations and a wildly imperfect climate action plan. But it is better than nothing, and it does contain a lot of good material. And for 1 second, could we just sit with that for a minute and appreciate the people assembled, including the members of the public who contributed to that effort? And then can we wake up in January of 2022 and move forward, fighting the fights we need to fight and advocating for the things we need to advocate? But could we just take a minute to appreciate all that we did do and the relationships that we did build and the coalitions that could develop from the work that was set up here? I will
Thanks,
stop.
Abby. Here, here. Thanks, Abby. And
Thanks,
thank
Abby.
you for everything you put into our group. We couldn't have done it without you.
Thing. I couldn't have done it without everybody else. It's a collective effort. That's the point. It's not about me or anybody else specifically.
Oh.
So
All right.
onward
Thank you.
to ARPA.
Yeah, let's get our checkbooks out. All right, so we've got a little bit of time. We've got about a half hour left. We do need to spend some time kind of checking in with Jane on kind of procedurally where we go after today. But we discussed that at this meeting, we're gonna see if we can agree upon some action items in the CAP that we're gonna recommend the council put in their list of ARPA funding priorities. I know that Ryan Patch provided some written recommendations with, I think, support from Marley and maybe some others. And I know that David and Lauren did so as well. Some others may have, so apologies if I'm not mentioning you. So I don't know, Jane, do you have any thoughts on how we would kind of manage this part of the process, or Abby?
From conversation yesterday at Cross Sector, folks putting forward, in that case, the sector leads put forward their ideas, and then in that case, they had 4, and since then 1 more, 5 recommendations that were put forward. And so they decided to put forward them all to the council with a memo that ties it all together and explains their rationale behind the principles put forward of how they would like to see the funding allocated. And so I imagine, based on the number that you have, you could make a similar sort of punt to the council. I think we're going to spend the ARPA money like 5 times. Well, we already spent it 5 times over with Cross Sector. So with your recommendations and rural resilience, I have no idea how the council is going to put forward a reasonable, I'll just say, set of priorities that actually guides anybody to make informed decisions with the dollars. But that I started to have that conversation this morning about how to help facilitate that. But so based on, I would ask that the task leads to put them together, explain each of them, and then rather than focus on setting priorities amongst yourselves, think about how you want to collectively make the pitch together as a concerted effort.
Okay, great. Well, why don't we, with that, if folks are agreeable, maybe hear from, oh, Lauren, your hand's up, I'm sorry.
No problem. It's kind of hidden in the shadows over there. I won't say I'm surprised, but I am a bit disappointed to hear that Cross Sector submitted more than the 200 million amount. I was kind of under the impression that we should be submitting things that I'm seeing shaking from Jane.
Yeah, I can clarify. So they put forward what could be spent in that space for like, so weatherization, they did a lot of work over the weekend with the weatherization at scale work group to say, if we were to hit the targets at this pace over, it would take this many dollars in the 3 years, which is 172 million. They in no way expect to be granted 172 million, and instead recommended that as the council consider the cross-sector emissions reduction space, that they put forward proportional contributions in the emissions reduction space to the emitter, the sectoral emitter. So I think it all kind of comes up to how much funding does the council want to recommend in the emissions reduction space versus resilience and adaptation, and ultimately sequestration, and that to help inform then how the buckets are set. So, you know, there was supposed to be a ceiling, like how much could be spent. And then rather than, we tried to push the conversation around, well, what's the minimum needed to actually make it viable to advance? But nobody really wanted to do that exactly. So instead they thought they know they could spend this much, so scale down.
To Abby's earlier point about the carrying the work of this subcommittee to the full council and the uphill battle we always face there. So that's helpful.
So what I was suggesting is maybe we would, hear briefly from Lauren and David, then from Ryan, and then anyone else who had suggested items, and then we could, see if we have agreement around a short list to forward on to the council. Sound good? Great. So Lauren, David, would either of you care to kind of briefly summarize your proposal? And I think you shared it with everyone in the group, right?
Yeah, it's posted. David, do you want to go over the working lands part first?
Sure. We're looking at the criteria and trying to figure out things that both fit the criteria and were also priorities for this group. And one of the areas of consensus, I think, was that we recognize that in order to keep our open space open, that we need to really invest in the businesses and landowners that make a living off of that open space. And in particular, we identified a couple of existing programs, the Working Lands Enterprise Fund and the VHCB's Farm and Forest Viability Program. Both which are focused on that category of work. And so we suggested basically supercharging those programs, which are proven and effective and have never been sufficiently funded.
Well, and just to quickly tie on to that, I apologize. I should have coordinated better on this, but I did send something really last minute regarding well, anyway, around WeLab and sort of the needs for, my understanding of the ARPA dollars is that low income folks are a priority group to be met in those needs. And so food insecurity has been such an issue during COVID, particularly that we made a suggestion, or I made a suggestion regarding WeLab and the food processing or infrastructure components that could go along with that, them being funded. So it is posted on the website. I can put it in the chat.
Yeah, and to the point, I mean, it's not the Working Lands effort and the Farm and Forest Viability Program aren't, directed primarily at low-income Vermonters, but they do benefit low-income Vermonters, and they also benefit the smaller businesses and smaller farms and forest landowners that tend to struggle more. So anyway, so that was our thinking. Welcome questions or comments.
Are you all seeing my screen before Jake jumps in?
Yeah.
Okay.
So question around the Farm and Forest Viability Program recommendation. Is that an annual amount? Is that over the years of available ARPA funding? That was just one thing that I was curious about. Because my one concern about that amount of money, say, annually is that, yes, that supercharges it for 3 years, but then it sets an amount that could likely fall back. And so just, those are the types of services that we really need to make sure are not ephemeral. And the service providers themselves, in order to have that capacity, it's going to take probably a year to really add the business planning resources to it. So yeah, just some questions around that.
I think those are big questions that the legislature and the agencies have to grapple with in terms of what their authority is to extend the money out over how many years. I don't have any question though, Jake, that at the end of this funding, that your question is going to be a real one. And it'll be a risk that the organizations that work in either of these areas have to kind of consider, because they'll need to staff up and increase capacity to implement the funding. And then there's a real chance the funding will go away. So I don't know how to navigate that, except it didn't make any sense to me to not ask for the money. And so we kind of were silent on those questions, which I think will be true of all of the ARPA fund questions in every scenario.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's one thing that was identified through the Farm to Place strategic plan was that at the very least, we identified 3 million annually of additional capacity that could be added to the farm and forest viability program. So just wanted to also note that. And that was in part why I was also asking the question about annual versus over the period of time of available funds.
Thanks. Yeah, and by the way, we have these both track recommendations that we made in our subcommittee report, and those recommendations weren't time limited. That was we were recommending a permanent increase in investment in these programs.
Okay, well, these look good to me. Jane has raised a question, I think, with the WeLab around kind of ARPA eligibility, and I think generally technical assistance is not kind of an eligible spend. I think unless it's targeted at kind of low income or communities that have been disproportionately affected by ARPA. And I think there may be a move to try to get the ag sector designated as a sector that's been disproportionately impacted, and then would make them eligible for some of this technical assistance funding. So, I think there is some gray associated with whether ARPA is eligible for the WeLab, but I'm fine kind of supporting the recommendation up to the council, and hopefully, through the kind of appropriation process that those details can be worked through.
So I guess, Lauren, do you want to move on to the next one?
Yeah, sure. The other recommendation that we worked on is here, pretty short. It's actually a multi-subcommittee proposal. Jane recommended at our meeting last week that we kind of coordinate with rural resilience and adaptation if we could, given some pretty significant overlap and shared or desired outcomes. So looking through, there was a pretty common theme both within our adaptation section and the rural resilience section of the climate action plan that spoke to a lot of different initiatives around flood resilience. And so we created one that would elevate some of the key components from our sections of the plan as well as theirs, and supported through existing tools and programs within state government. So hopefully easy to get the money on the ground and moving and not needing to stand up anything new. And then the 3 bullets speak to how they meet the 4, as we see them, ARPA funding recommendations or criteria rather.
I think this looks great.
Great. Any other thoughts, questions, comments on these recommendations? Okay. Excellent. Let's see. So I think we have kind of some initial support for these. Let's see what others bring to the table, then we can loop back and make a final recommendation. So Ryan, do you want to? I know I at least have a couple I want to bring up. I think some others too do as well. So if you could try to be pretty quick and run through yours, that'd be great.
Absolutely happy to do so. So I will start from how we approach this. Had a meeting this week with Marley and Alyssa and John to kind of share and discuss. And there's a lot of effort that can be undertaken, and the proposal on the website reflects those that can best be achieved using the tight timeline for obligating and spending ARPA dollars, as well as the narrowed eligibility compared to general fund or potentially other dollars that may be out there. Starting from looking at the capacity that exists on the service delivery model that is currently utilized to deliver technical assistance and financial assistance to farms to implement projects. The scale of existing programming and the timeline to obligate it came out to around $9.5 million to obligate that by December 1st, 2024, and to spend it by 2026. Looking at the $200 million that's available and the 16% that's attributed to agricultural emissions, that leaves about $32 million potentially for agriculture. And I would suggest the other natural and working lands to make a very clear argument that funding appropriated to those land uses is important, not just for mitigation efforts, but for the co-benefits for resilience and adaptation. And so looking at ag mitigation as an important and existing area where the state of Vermont or the Clean Water Board has already recommended some ARPA dollars be appropriated to support clean water efforts that will be implemented through the programs that are listed in that document that is on the website. That's about, call it 10 million, that leaves about $20 million for, some of these other areas that have been recommended, whether it's around food security or natural and working lands resilience. I think that's perhaps a bit separate from the co-recommendation from rural resilience and Ag and Eco, but definitely support that one as well. So yeah, that's my that's what's in that document. I think that those monies can be spent on eligible projects, deliver quantified water quality benefit, as well as provide directionally important ag mitigation services that can be quantified in future iterations of the Climate Action Plan or emissions inventory as those emission reduction coefficients are developed and accepted by the state. So that's my summary. Happy to answer any questions. General eligibility for clean water state revolving funds from EPA are projects that can be considered generally eligible for ARPA dollars, and there's a list that I include in that, which includes many of the most popular conservation practices that are implemented on farms through those programs. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Ryan. Thoughts on that? I think that makes sense from my perspective. I think the money total is something we can probably reflect on, but otherwise, I think that recommendation looks good to me. Alyssa.
Yeah, Ryan, you did a great job as always. And I wonder if you could ask for more. I think in light of the amounts being looked at for other proposals, would it make sense to double it? Does the state have the capacity for that? I think sometimes in cases it's good to ask for more than you would like to end up with so that you end up there. And I'm not sure if that's this case, but I think asking for more might be a good idea. Just wanted to suggest that.
The budget proposed there includes current cost share rates and lead time that's needed. I think one of the challenges is obligation by the close of 2024 and when this money would be made available. There's significant planning that needs to happen in delivery of some of these structural practices. I would absolutely agree there is more need out there and more money appropriated that could certainly be spent. the timeline for obligation and expenditure is, I think, what's limiting that. And I certainly, I think that's a realistic proposal of what could be moved and the capacity that's needed to do that. Could ask for more, sure. You're in the, would you want more money? It's like, oh, sure, of course. But I think that is a realistic proposal, and I just wanted to be clear in my introduction remarks, like that is not all that's needed, right? There is much more capacity and many more efforts that are needed to support many of the climate goals we've articulated here. So it is a narrow proposal.
Any other questions or comments for Ryan? David?
Ryan, this is great. And I just want to note, one of the interesting dilemmas that comes up in the context of funding for agricultural pollution controls has been whether when we invest in hardened infrastructure, we end up sinking public monies into infrastructure that then later isn't useful because the farm goes out of business or we find other new approaches that are more effective. And this doesn't run afoul of any of those kinds of questions. This is the kind of investment that's going to have a payoff no matter what. And so I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that the group put into this recommendation. And I agree with Alyssa that go big.
Great.
I would certainly support if that's what the group wants to elevate. I absolutely would support that.
Great. And I just, go ahead, Abby.
No, Billy, go ahead.
I just was going to point out, I just put in the chat a few actions directly out of the CAP that came from our subcommittee that I would put forward. Sorry to do it in the chat, but the first one really is the same as what Lauren and David talked about, supporting WeLab. So I think that's covered there. The second one is one that I think came out of some of the work that Abby's group did, prioritizing Vermonters feeding Vermonters. There was a $500,000 a year ask in that. I think since that's targeted to low-income Vermonters, that would be ARPA eligible. So I'm suggesting 1.5 million there, which is the $500,000 for over 3 years. And then the last one is increasing funding for urban tree planting. I think since, again, that would happen in areas that I think by census are considered low income, I think it would largely be ARPA eligible. And this is in our CAP. I got some additional information from our urban forestry program, and they thought the 1.5, which would be $500,000 over 3 years, would be what they could manage. So just a couple points for consideration.
And then I support all of those, certainly. And then this is what I'm gonna try to put it in, it's not working. Anyway, my recommendation was that there be a specific need added for 10 million to WeLab. And maybe can somebody else share their screen and share my, I can't do it. Thank you, Lauren.
Is this it, Abby?
I know, to support food processing, logistics, aggregation and distribution capacities to try to meet, similar to the Vermonters feeding Vermonters, to try to achieve better low-income food security moving forward.
Great.
It seems to me could tie in quite well with the other WeLab recommendations and Ryan's recommendations as well.
Really happy to see that second bullet.
Jake, I would.
that Billy that you added there, and I was trying to formulate a recommendation around this, and it's more of a question, I think, that second bullet brings up is, so one, the farm to school network, or the farm to school grant program. I think we had a recommendation contained within the CAP to support that, and so there's an annual appropriation that goes to that program that I think sort of could maybe be built into that second bullet to increase the amount. And also they're looking for a dedicated or past this year funding for the local food incentive, purchasing incentive that's going to go to schools. So they had a one-time $500,000 appropriation, and I think again, I think that could be included into that second bullet, where that funding gets extended out, for a couple more years at least. So that would, yeah, so that's another 500,000 that I'm thinking about. And then there's also EBT, the purchasing of EBT for farmers markets. And we had estimated that that's another like $50,000 a year. So yeah, there's a couple of recommendations that I feel like could actually fit into that second bullet and increase the ask, that are also built into the recommendations in the cap. So yeah, just sorry, I'm thinking out loud a little bit here, but I just haven't had a lot of time to think through how to put that into a request. But they're all food security, and I think food security based and also low income. They impact low income Vermonters, so I think they are eligible.
Judy, you have your hand up.
Yes, I'm not sure if you're aware or not, but Shelburne just passed a law that every new house has to be retrofit to support solar. And the electricians are no longer installing 1 to 200 amp panels in new construction. They're now putting 400 amp panels into new construction to support the electric charging of cars. And so what this is going to do is distance, make it for a greater distance for low income people to afford a new house. And so we need to put some funding in there for equity to help in issues like this, because the distance will just keep getting greater and greater now.
I'm not sure. I totally take your point. I'm not sure how we add it in here, except for the fact that, as I understand it, at least the low income components of this are quite called out in at least how Doug presented it to us, that was one of the very clear funding priorities or places that funds could be focused. But I guess I'm not sure how to address that specifically.
Are you not sure how to address equity, or are you not sure how to address the housing disparity growing, the difference between?
Well, certainly I would claim to have no answers for either, but in this particular context with the ARPA dollars, I'm not sure the best way to frame it, because I'm not entirely sure how they're determining the low income status. I don't know. Jane, if you have any thoughts, I would welcome them.
I don't have any direct feedback on how to make this a link. I'll just say the problem with ARPA, I'll just say, is that there's a lot of gray, right? Like, so things seem to come in and be clear, but what we're seeing is that as things get reviewed by Guidehouse or beyond, if they're anything high risk, which I've been searching all week and working with our CFO here, Emily Byrne, on trying to get clear guidance out. The likelihood is a lot of time will get invested and then things will get rejected at the end. And like, that's where easements are, I'll just say. I think it's totally appropriate to put it forward because it's a gray area, but they have not been viewed a slam dunk and are typically viewed as high risk.
Yeah, there had been 10 million of ARPA funds appropriated for VHCB land conservation programs, and that got flipped to general fund because it didn't screen through ARPA. You know, I think river corridor easements and the hazard mitigation easements are different because I think they're both SRF eligible or targeted to low income, but general land conservation isn't, so far as we understand it.
So you've digressed off my question.
So Judy, your
is there-
point is that as more valuable renewable energy infrastructure gets installed on houses, those houses become more expensive and difficult for low-income people to acquire?
Yes. So I guess that on top of, is there any ARPA monies being used for equity?
There's tremendous hundreds of thousands of dollars going into the development of affordable housing across the state, both home ownership, rental, new construction and renovation. So that's probably the biggest single source of ARPA funding, at least currently in Vermont, is for to support affordable housing. So I don't know if that addresses your concern exactly, but it's certainly been a priority of the state.
Okay, it doesn't really, I mean, I don't believe people who have an electric car need their personal charging station, but the houses are being retrofitted for that. The new ones now. And it just seems like everybody else goes to a gas station or whatever. And it seems like they could go to a charging station. But it's increasing the cost unnecessarily.
I think there's a lot of people that are aware of that in the affordable housing sector and are trying to think of creative ways to deal with that. I think the unfortunate thing is, you know, like with all of these things, private lands and lots, et cetera, are, you know, I'm not sure how with ARPA we can address any of that, but yeah, I know that it's a massive area of concern and discussion, and as far as, you know, the folks who are thinking really carefully and strategically about how to meet the needs of affordable housing in the state.
Okay.
So we're almost at time and we're not done with our agenda, but as far as these recommendations, Jane, when do we need to get them to the council?
Today.
Today? Okay, well, it sounds like we can test this, but it sounds like my sense is that we've got general consensus agreement around the items that have been put forward. There's been some additional conversation about kind of consolidating the food security recommendations and augmenting them with some additional details. I think there's probably general agreement with that as well. Can someone agree to or some people agree to, one, pull together a composite list of our recommendations, and two, work with others to come up with the food security piece that's inclusive of everything that folks want in it?
I just, if you want to send individual language together, I can put it all together in a memo.
Okay.
What's
Do we
the,
have any additional? Oh, sorry.
yeah, I was gonna say, when do we need to get, is this a by end of today deal?
Well, yeah, I mean, I have to put it all together by the end of today.
Okay. My childcare situation is a little tricky right now.
Jake,
Yeah.
do you
Yeah,
just
I mean-
want to send?
I think we can. I think we can pull something together.
Okay.
I've got some stuff written out right now that is just more, I think, of giving additional examples for what that bullet that Billy put together could touch upon as well. So yeah, Abby, you want to,
So
maybe we can work on that.
yeah, we can try that. Or I was just sort of wondering if the 3 things that are on the website are generally okay, so long as they have the sort of the detail, you know, if Jake got the details, if we added the farm share, crop cash, et cetera, into some of the food security language, generally speaking, are we feeling comfortable with the 3 documents? Wait, Billy's isn't, and Billy's in the chat to go forward as a, for Jane to put into a memo per our recommendations.
I think the only issue is the recommendation that you put together, Abby, with the team that was largely for Working Lands Enterprise, that kind of can be conflated maybe or joined with David's. I think it sounds like the ag mitigation one is probably good to go as a standalone. I think the flood resilience one is a good to go as a standalone. I think the Working Lands Enterprise and food security and figuring out if those are 2 separate or combined is what's on the table right now for discussion, I think.
Judy just put in the chat, she believes there should be something specific for education around equity. And I certainly agree that we obviously need to fund those efforts. I don't know that there's a way to have that as a part of ARPA dollars, or does anybody know that better than I, or how we could potentially? Oh, yeah, okay. So Lauren says we heard at council that education wouldn't fit under ARPA. Jane, is that accurate per your understanding? Okay. So Judy, it sounds like for whatever reasons, the parameters of the ARPA funding don't extend to education. So I think in that regard, at least we have some pretty clear recommendations in the CAP regarding our thoughts on education and how we need to move forward in that regard. And, you know, we can push for that to be taken up in the legislature.
Yeah, and I just wanted to clarify that this is all about the ARPA funds. The legislature certainly can appropriate other state funds that are more flexible to support other CAP implementation steps.
Right. Okay, so where do we go from here? Alyssa's leaving us. Bye, Alyssa. Happy holidays. I think if people are comfortable, I will try to work throughout today to get some of these things somehow resolved into what Jane can make sense of in terms of how to distinguish for WeLab, et cetera. I'll just try to figure that out. And Billy, do we have another public comment we need to do, or are we done for today?
We didn't have one on the agenda, so I don't think we have to. I think if you're so inclined, we certainly can. I need to drop off shortly myself. So we did want to have a kind of moment of appreciation for everyone, which I think you did nicely earlier. But we can certainly reprise that and, you know, thank everyone for their work. And I think we're going to hopefully hear from Jane about like what the future of our group has in store. And I don't know, Jane, if you want to take a couple minutes to do that, but I do apologize. I need to drop off. So I'll see you all again soon. Bye.
I have the same meeting as Billy. So I also have to drop, but I think
Okay.
what really that needs to happen is you all need to decide when and if you'd like to meet again. And I will say that most of the subcommittees to date are focusing on their next meeting being that place of process conversation about what the subcommittee looks like, goals and workload going forward. So I think that it's okay to table that conversation till then and just think about when you all want to meet again.
Okay, so I would say stay tuned post-holiday season for something from Billy and I as to how we may or may not move forward with this group assembled. And as I said, much appreciation to all of you, including those of you in the public who have stuck with us this far. And my sincerest wishes for a happy holiday season, however that looks for all of you. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.